Thanks everyone for joining me today. I have a special guest as we get ready for the third GOP debate in Miami, Florida. I have with me Sean Spicer. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So you were the White House press secretary under Donald Trump. You've been covering politics for years. You've interviewed some of the biggest names in the country. You also have the Sean Spicer Show podcast. Tonight is the last debate, really, between all of the people that still believe that they have a shot at becoming president. What do you think are going to be the biggest topics of the night?
Well, I think there's a few. I think the NBC folks are going to make abortion a huge part of this. This is their default after last night's election. How the moderators handle this, I think, will be big. Just as a side note, I ran the debates for the first time in actual political history for either party in 2015, 2016. And I'm sort of intrigued by why the RNC chose NBC to do this. They didn't host a debate in 2015, 2016. I think it's a huge mistake. I think there's going to be some regret on behalf of the RNC members, not necessarily the leadership, but I think the members when they realize what happened. I think immigration will come up. I did a Zoom call. I do this thing, Stephen, called debate prep. It's a call I do on the morning of debates and the morning afterwards. We live stream it on my YouTube channel. We do it with Mark Halperin, former Governor Scott Walker, who himself is a presidential candidate. Gail Gitcho, a Republican operative, is with us today. And we were asking the same thing. What issues do you think are definitely going to come up? Scott Walker believed that TikTok specifically was going to come up, and I will be interested to see if that gets addressed. I think the X factor is also Hugh Hewitt, the Salem radio host, who's going to be there tonight. He was one of the ones that we had in 2015 as well. Hugh is unbelievably intelligent and I would say also cerebral. Like, I feel like when you have a conversation with Hugh, it's like a PhD. I don't have a PhD, but I assume that when you have one, you go up to a board and they ask you all sorts of crazy questions. Hugh's that kind of smart. And I sort of wonder, and it's not intentional. He's not doing it. It's gotcha. He just lives in a mental world that's usually like 5 layers above where most people live because he's so well read. So it'll be interesting to see what he asks and how the candidates respond to them.
Yeah, I do agree. Moving away from a right-leaning media does open them up to abortion. And with what happened last night, it does look like more and more states are choosing to have late-term abortion, not just abortion, but late-term abortion in their constitution or part of their state laws. Obviously, I personally think the southern border is going to be something important. But now that I think about it, that may just be important to the person in the audience, not necessarily the person that's trying to ask questions or trigger a meltdown or get a fight going. But certainly the people that I spend time with, they're very nervous about the southern border.
Can I jump in right here? I think you're putting your finger on a very important issue. And this gets back to why I did what I did in 2015. So I'd been at the RNC for 4 years. When I first got there in 2012, Reince Priebus and I were trying to go to the first debate in Iowa, and we had to literally ask the chairman, a guy by the name of Matt Strawn, who's the chairman of the Iowa party, if we could have 2 tickets to come to a debate. And he was like, yeah, I'll take care of you. The RNC, the national party, had 0 role, neither did the DNC for that matter, in the party's national primary debates. It was a crime. And so after that cycle, I said to Reince, if we stick around, I'll stick around if you task me with the goal of getting the primary debates under the guise of the RNC. And part of what we did is we realized that the media was dragging around our candidates around the country in places. And we had one debate that was on a Saturday night, one debate that was on a Sunday night, and it was a huge waste of the candidates' time. There was a bunch of liberal media asking questions, and this gets to your point, they were asking questions that they cared about, that were in the interest of getting ratings or clicks, and not in the interest of informing Republican primary and caucus goers, which is the purpose of the debate, to help them make a decision. And so to see the RNC revert back to giving a debate to NBC, somebody that we didn't allow have one in 2015, to watch Lester Holt and Kristen Welker go beat up on our candidates so that they can get ratings and appease their left-leaning audience, to me is I don't understand. I find it almost like political malpractice.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of the other areas they're going to do a gotcha on them is like, oh, why does the GOP want people in Ukraine to die? You know, like they're going to bring up things that are a concern to Republicans, but they're going to slam it or slant it
Right.
in a way that actually makes the Democrat Party look better, just because of the way that they can phrase the question. So people should
Right.
definitely be on the outlook, or the lookout rather, for sneaky questions like that. Now, when it comes to actual voters, and what they care about, what do you think is the maybe the top two issues that they want to hear about?
Well, I would argue that what you just said is important to understand, that the issue is one thing, how it's framed is another. So, for example, I think the issue of abortion is important. I think the issue of life, but it's not the issue itself, right? So what I mean by that is every candidate up there is pro-life. But I think how we message it and how we bring more people to our side is important. So if I were asking the question, I would say the issue after Roe versus Wade was overturned, something that Republican and conservatives have fought for years, how do you message this the best to bring people into the field, because to the fold, because it clearly, the way it's currently being framed, isn't a winner. I think NBC is going to go after and make it seem like a complete negative. I don't think abortion is a loser. I think the way it's being messaged is a loser. And I wrote an op-ed about this. It's at the top of my Twitter feed, about how we should be on offense, not defense. That's one. Two, immigration, I think, is important. Three is how we conduct our foreign affairs. To your point about Ukraine, what's the U.S.'s role? How do we ensure that we are securing our national interests without handing blank checks? I think national spending and debt is a huge issue that's being overlooked. How to address the fentanyl crisis. I mean, there's plenty. School choice, parental rights, wokeness in the corporate culture. And I think the other things that haven't been covered at the last couple of debates, issues affecting veterans, Second Amendment. There's a lot of stuff that I think has been overlooked in the past few debates, but that just gives you a quick list of what I think should be done. I do think that Governor Walker was right on her call this morning that TikTok should be brought up. Well, I mean, you had Vivek Ramaswamy defending being on TikTok. I think that's completely ridiculous. It's an app owned by the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist government, to allow them to influence what our citizens think and to collect data on them because they want to. They are not an ally; they're an adversary of ours, and so it is important. And to hear those distinctions, I think, is worth it.
Yeah. Do you think it was wise or foolish at this point for Donald Trump to skip another debate?
Very wise.
Very wise.
Because what the point of a debate is to get your issues across, to make people understand you, what you're gonna. Everybody knows what he's for. He was president for 4 years. He was the nominee twice. I don't think anyone doesn't know what he believes. And also, just from a strategic standpoint, when you're 40, 50 points up, why would you give your opponents an opportunity just to take pot shots at you? But from a multitude of strategic reasons, I wouldn't advise him. And I've told him I don't think it's a good idea. Now, does that dynamic change? Do I think debates are good? Yes. So do I think he should debate in the general election? Absolutely. If this was a one-on-one race, do I think that he might want to reconsider? Sure. But from a strategic standpoint, I don't think it makes sense. I do think it makes sense for the party to hold these debates to create a historic precedent that they're having them, that there's an opportunity to be there. But every candidate has an opportunity to decide whether they're going to participate or not based on what their campaign strategy is.
Yeah, and my understanding is a big part of these debates is to get your name out there. So, for example, I've told people, hey, I had the privilege of interviewing presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Almost all of them said, "Who? I don't know who that is." Right. So in my world, I'm like, oh, of course you would know who this person is. The general public doesn't know who these people are. But if you don't know who Donald Trump is at this point, you've been living under a rock, right?
Yeah.
So like he doesn't need to get his name out there anymore. If anything, he needs to get his name back because
Right.
they're using and abusing it.
Yeah, exactly. For these five others that will take the stage tonight, this is probably the greatest media attention that they'll get. And that what they don't get, they're raising money to buy. So it makes sense for them to be there. Trump doesn't need this. He's counter programming again tonight in Miami. He'll do very, very well. My former deputy, Sarah Sanders, I understand, will be there to endorse him.
Okay, interesting. Who do you think has done well in the first two debates? And after all the numbers and data come out, who do you think of the five tonight will be dropping out of the race, say in the next week or 30 days?
Oh, really good question. So here's in the first debate, I think Ramaswamy came out of the gate really strong in Milwaukee. I don't think he capitalized on it. And I said this to him at the time. I mean, a lot of Republicans, especially in the early states, New Hampshire, Iowa, are older. And I think a 38-year-old guy that's never run for office coming out calling the former vice president Mike and Ron and all that, it was a little unbecoming, a little disrespectful. And I think people thought it was a little, for a guy who hadn't really earned his place yet. And I don't believe me. I like what he has done. I've been a huge fan of his, but I think how you conduct yourself coming out of the gate is important. I think he came off a little too brash, and there were hints of arrogance there that people on second, and he just invited getting punched, not physically, but like politically, they were coming after him right after the gate on his policy issues, etc. I think he overdid it, and that's why he went on almost like an apology tour in the second debate, and you haven't seen him reap the benefits of that first debate. So I think he did well in the first, didn't do well in the second. I think Haley did well in the second. She had that line against Ramaswamy where she said, "Every time I hear you, I get dumber." That did her a lot of favors. I think DeSantis has been doing fine. It's like he's treading water. He's not hurting himself, but he hasn't had that breakout moment. And so as for tonight, I really do believe this is a race between DeSantis and Haley to make the case as to who the best alternative is to Trump. Now, do I think that's going to ultimately matter? No. I think Trump's the nominee, and it's his to lose. But I think that for a lot of these donors that don't like him and the never Trumpers, they're looking for an alternative. And my guess is that if Nikki can come out hard tonight and DeSantis doesn't have a great night, then she is going to see an uptick because people are looking for somebody to be with that's not Trump. And last night, I think they thought it was going to be Youngkin if he did well. A lot of this stuff I think is pie in the sky, but it's just how a lot of these donors, et cetera, think. Who is next to drop out? My guess is that if what I just said is true and Haley has a good night and takes a bump, I think DeSantis drops out. DeSantis or Tim Scott. Tim Scott, here's the obvious reason. His polling is not good. He needs to get to South Carolina. He has not done a ton in Iowa. He's not polling where there. He's not all in New Hampshire. He's all in South Carolina. That's a long way to go on fumes, and he's on fumes. So I don't know that he'll make the fourth debate. I think that's a strong possibility that he drops out. He's an incumbent two-term senator. And so if you don't do well, it's kind of embarrassing. And I think that he may just drop out. Similarly, I think DeSantis, if he slides again, would consider dropping out because he's got to stay as governor and he's losing political capital in Florida every day.
Okay. Do you think Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie's anti-Donald Trump message has resonated or swayed MAGA voters in any way?
Has it worked? Sure. For Christie, it's given him 7-8%, but that's the ceiling. I mean, you can't go around insulting all of the people in somebody's base and then wonder why you don't pick them up. So I think he's gotten as much as he's going to get, 6-7%, whatever it is. But like I said, he's walking around poking them in the eye and like, Donald Trump's horrible. You're dumb for sticking with him. He was at the Florida summit last week and he was getting booed. And then he went after the crowd and said, if you guys don't want to accept reality. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not really sure that that's bringing anyone to your side.
Yeah, and then he called them like reprehensible or something. I was like, ooh, that's a Hillary Clinton deplorable moment.
That right. So I think like I said, he's all in New Hampshire. And he's made it clear if he doesn't do well, he's out. And I think that's right. I just don't see him doing very well in New Hampshire. But he's got nothing to lose at this point. So I can see him sticking around to New Hampshire. But I also think he's going to be on the bubble come the next debate. Now, luckily, I think he's saving his money and saying, okay, I'm just going to hoard it and go in all in New Hampshire. My guess, look, the way I've seen this race is this. You had Pence and DeSantis all in Iowa. Pence was moving backwards in Iowa. He's out. So I just told you why I think DeSantis is now what his plan is. He's got to do well there. And if he doesn't do well in Iowa, then he's done. Scott and Haley are all in South Carolina. Right now, Trump's up multiple, double digits in South Carolina. So both of them, you can't get your butt kicked in your own state and then say I should stay in.
Yeah.
So there you go. Then the race is over at the end of the early states. Trump watches it into Super Tuesday as the de facto nominee.
Gotcha. More and more people are saying it's time for the other GOP candidates to drop out and coalesce behind Trump. Do you agree with this? And what reason might people continue on and not drop out?
So I just kind of made the case as to I think it's going to happen. It's not a question. I mean, I think I almost like it naturally, meaning let the process take its course, and then you can't say they were forced out or anything else. But I think it's going to happen. It's just a question. It's going to take a little bit of time. I think each one of these guys has an ego, and they also have consultants, and the consultants only get paid when their person is in the race buying things or doing stuff. So as soon as you drop out, your consultant stops getting paid.
Gotcha.
You don't do any more polls. You don't do any more advertising. You don't hire any more get out the vote folks what they make a cut on. So all of these guys have people telling them, come on, boss, stay in the race. It's worth it for another 30 days because they're trying to make another car payment or something.
Gotcha.
So that's part of it. But the reality is, and I think you saw this with Pence, people, for the most part, don't like spending their money on things that don't pay a return. And if you are a candidate, even if you're not giving money, if you're a volunteer, I mean, are you going to give up your Saturday to go put up signs or make phone calls for somebody that's at 1%? Probably not. And so the financial piece to this, and I think this is what drove Pence to make his decision. At some point, you realize I'm spending more dollars than I'm bringing in, and I'm financially on the hook if I don't. So maybe I should get out. And I think that that's going to happen. Now, the X factor is Ramaswamy. When you have a ton of your own money, you can stay in. And so when does he realize that it's not a good idea?
Yeah. Do you think...
Panic, one more point for your audience that's important to understand. In most states, in almost every state, you have what they call a threshold. So in New Hampshire, I think it's 10%. If you don't hit 10%, you don't even qualify for delegates, okay? It's as high as 20% in some states. California's got this thing where if you get over 50%, you win all the state's delegates. And right now, Trump is up over 50%. So the reason that's important is that if you're polling at 6, 7, 8%, and you start going through these contests and you get no delegates, at some point it's like, kicking field goals, but missing them. You're not putting any points on the board. And the only way you ever can become the nominee is that if you get what it's like 1,400 plus delegates to become the nominee. And right now, after these first 4 contests and then going into Super Tuesday, if you can't show that you can actually win a delegate, then I don't think you're going to have donors or grassroots support that are willing to give up time or money for you.
Okay. Do you think DeSantis, Nikki Haley, they're still doing fairly well, but is there any chance that they are holding out because Trump might end up in jail, or some of these 14th Amendment, kick him off the ballot lawsuits actually go through? That has to play a part in them moving forward, right?
I think you're right. It does. The reality, though, is I've had I had tonight on my show, I have Mike Davis from the Article 3 Project talking about some of Trump's legal woes. I've had Alan Dershowitz on the show several times. And the consensus among all legal experts, and even some of the folks like that are on the left on CNN, will tell you that they don't see any of these cases being resolved in terms of appeals by election day. So, and it definitely not in the primary season. I mean, Fulton County, Georgia might, but there'll be an immediate appeal there. The New York one that's going on right now is a civil case. So I think that there there is definitely a belief among many that maybe something could happen, but I don't think anything actionable, meaning that they would send him to jail or get him taken off the ticket. I do think the 14th Amendment thing that you're touching on is extremely important. And again, as I said, I've had this to be a constant discussion on my podcast, that the Supreme Court will have to take this up. And I don't think, as a non-lawyer, I've looked at this and had people, really smart people, tell me, look, number one, the president of the United States, it's settled law, is not an officer of the United States. It's just, there's case law on it. And the 14th Amendment, Clause 3 says that officers of the United States, blah, 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 blah. So that's number one. Number two, it's only been used for the Confederacy. So we're not, I think that's passed. And number three is it says engaged in insurrection. Well, no one's even been charged with an insurrection except for the only people who talk about insurrection are the people on CNN. No one has ever been charged on January 6th with an insurrection. They've been charged with a bunch of, unlawful entering a building, disrupting a public proceeding. Right. But you can't then kick someone from running for president off a charge that no one has actually, not including the president himself, but obviously no one surrounding that event was charged with insurrection. So how do you then turn and do this? But I think that's going to be a pretty easy thing for the Supreme Court to ultimately say, is to, you can't kick somebody off the ballot, A, that wasn't an officer of the United States, which is clearly stated in here, and two, that didn't engage in anything that anybody's been charged with.
Yeah. I would love to have Mike Davis on, so please drop my name. Yeah. But I had Alan Dershowitz on, and he's coming on this Friday, but he had mentioned to me that this is a Civil War rule, and we're not in the Civil War anymore. And Trump
we'd be in a civil war, but not in the Civil War.
Yeah. And he pointed out that Trump never actually went to the Capitol. Trump didn't go into the building. Trump didn't do any vandalism or damage. And his words are recorded as peacefully and patriotically. And this is coming from a guy who said, I don't like Trump. I'll never vote for Trump. I look forward to voting against him for a third time. This guy just loves the law, and he realizes the law is not going to block him from running. So these are just waste of time, try and scare the base moves by the Democrat Party.
Well, I don't think that the one thing, first of all, it's funny, you and I have the same view of Alan, because I love having him on, because I tell my listeners all the time, I could get a Trump supporter on here any day of the week that's a lawyer that supports Trump. I love Alan Dershowitz because he's not a Trump supporter. And he says, here's why Trump shouldn't be done. And that's the beauty of it, is that getting somebody who supports you to say that they like you is not tough. Getting somebody who doesn't like you to say that they support you is a challenge. And that's where Dershowitz comes down. And that's why I actually like what he says, because it runs contrary to what I think a lot of people want to see. But I think that they really do want him off the ballot. This is not the Democrats. I mean, the case in New York is is unbelievable. The idea that the judge decided the outcome. And that's the thing that, again, I find amazing. I asked Mike Davis about this today. Trump was found guilty of fraud before the trial started. The only thing that's happening right now in this Manhattan courthouse is on the periphery. It's deciding what the penalty will be, whether he loses his license and how big the fine is. But they've already found him guilty of fraud without a trial. It is unbelievable. And I mean, there's a million things to go down. Like I asked Mike Davis this today, of all the crimes, think about this. And I don't know anything about what anyone's done in New York, but you're telling me with every major bank, financial institution, private equity firm, that nobody's crossed the line. And yet all what the Letitia James should be focused on is the valuation of what a guy said his properties were worth years ago, that there was no victim for. He paid the loans back. Everybody got their money. And so that's what the focus of the Attorney General of New York should be on. I don't think even the biggest Trump hater would take issue with that.
Yeah. And a lot of them haven't. A lot of my family are Democrats, and even they're going, this seems really weird. Like, this seems like a big waste of time. Their big thing is like, okay, was he somehow connected to these groups that came to the Capitol violently? and did a bunch of destruction. Like that's where they think there could be something. But this the documents at Mar-a-Lago, the Stormy Daniels situation, the New York fraud, they all think it's just a giant witch hunt.
It
And
is.
these are from Democrats, you know.
Right. But that's the thing, is that the Democrats that are pursuing these charges, whether it's New York or Florida or Georgia, they do the proverbial jump the shark every time. When you value Mar-a-Lago at 18 million bucks, I was there last week and I kept joking with everybody, like, hey, which part do you think is worth 18 million bucks? Because there's like cabanas that are, it just, people laugh and go, okay, that's silly. And you go, okay, but you're going after Trump for overvaluing a property, and then you're telling him that Mar-a-Lago, which stretches from the intercoastal waterway to the Atlantic Ocean, is worth 18 million bucks, when you literally can Zillow, a parcel of land anywhere on the Palm Beach area that far exceeds that. And then you go, okay, now this is how big, how many acres is this? It just doesn't pass the smell test.
Yeah. It's like 20 acres, has ocean on both sides. It's also an income driven property. So you can have a property that's, say, worth $100,000, but it brings in $200,000 of revenue times 10 years. And now you've got a $2 million property. So there's so many different ways.
Not just that, but here's the thing. And I asked Mike Davis this. I have refinanced my house to make home improvements. I bought some investment properties, et cetera. And when I went to refinance my house at one point, they'll say, you'll talk and they'll say, well, how much do you think your house is worth? Well, my kids have grown up here. I've got a lot of great memories. I think it's worth $1 billion. It's the most, I love this place. And, what's the bank say to you? Well, that might be nice. I know you love it.
Verify that.
We're going to send an appraiser out. And so I was like, why is somehow Donald Trump the guy that we're relying on? If you're going to get a loan for a couple $1 million, or probably a couple tens of millions of dollars, do you think that they're literally going to just take your word? They're going to send an appraiser and somehow, and I was asking Mike Davis this. I said, I don't understand this. Like, why is he the guy? Like, wouldn't you be going after the appraiser or the bank and saying, how did you guys agree to do this? And these aren't like little mom and pop shops. It's not like you're loan shark in the thing. This is Deutsche Bank.
Yeah. Well, and even those people get questioned. They say, okay, what comps did you use to compare this to? Because you're comparing, a $1 billion building to a $100 million. That's a 10x difference. Like, you've got to have as close to apples as you can, or the bank officers go, we're going to order another appraisal, or what did you get bought off? Like, all of this stuff has little checks and balances along the way.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying it's funny, because I remember when we were looking to do a project and they gave us the comps, and it was actually the other way. And I said, this is ridiculous. You guys are using, a house that's it's half a mile away. This is only a 2-bedroom. We have whatever. But you have to have an outside appraiser. And even the bank said, okay, well, we can order a new one, but they don't even have a lot of wiggle room. And suddenly you're saying that Donald Trump's the guy that I think for anybody who has a brain, they can look at these cases and say, okay, this is literally somebody going after Trump because they don't like him.
Yeah. Okay. Question. Can Donald Trump really beat Joe Biden? And then secondly, if next summer the Democrats decide to sneak in someone like Gavin Newsom or Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton or somebody else, could he beat that person?
Take these one at a time. Can he win right now? Absolutely. Look, you've seen, and the media is admitting it. The New York Times Siena poll that came out over the weekend shows him leading in every battleground state. They think he's up by 10 in Nevada, Michigan, you name it. The only state that's a battleground state. And remember, there's only 8 states that matter. He was down 2 in Wisconsin, which is the margin of error. The margin of error is 4, so it means you could be up 2 or down 6. But the reality is that would be great. If I were going into the election down 2 in Wisconsin, I'd be happy. But the idea that he's up in every other state this far out. And the one thing that you've got to remember, everyone tried to do this Monday morning quarterbacking this week. And when these polls came out, said, well, Obama was in this spot and Clinton was in the spot. Now, the difference is the number one issue driving a lot of the concern with Biden is his age. And that's the one thing you can't fix. Unless that guy's Benjamin Button, he's not going to move in the other direction, right? He's getting older. He's going to fall more. He's going to make more gaffes. That's the reality. And he can't undo that. And they know that. That wasn't the case with Obama or with Clinton. So that's the one thing they don't want to tell you, is that the biggest liability they have with Biden is the one thing that you can't do anything about. So can Trump win? Absolutely. Remember, in 2016, 3 states, about 50,000 votes, decided the election. In 2020, 3 states, 73,000 votes, decided the election. Will this be close? Yes. But Trump didn't win by that much electorally in terms of what it took to put that together, and he didn't lose by that much in 2016 versus 2020. So you look at the states. I mean, I think Arizona and Georgia are natural pickups. The way that things have been going in Michigan. Think about this for Michigan. It's got one of the largest Muslim population, if not the largest. I got to look that up. Right now, you've got all these folks that are furious with Biden over his handling of Israel. You've got the unions that are really pissed about his drive to electric vehicles that are costing them jobs in their future. So he's got a big problem in Michigan, and that's only 3 states. So you start to look at, I still think Wisconsin's in play. Nevada's had issues. Boom, 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 boom. We're talking the 8 states in play are 93 electoral votes. So a lot there. Second part of your question. He beats Biden handily. I think he beats, not only do I think, the polls bear that out. They also bear out that he will beat Kamala for obvious reasons. I think the scenario that you're asking about is where I get worried. And I had Jim McLaughlin will be on my show tonight. It streams at 6:00 for anyone who wants to watch this. And I asked Jim exactly what you're asking. I said, I get you guys know that you can beat Biden. You know you can beat Kamala. But when you looked at that New York Times poll, you were up 4 with Biden, or up 3 with Biden, up 4 with Kamala as an average, down 9 against a generic Democrat. Okay. Now, you and I both know there's no such thing as a generic Democrat. That doesn't exist. But I do think that a Gavin Newsom, and there's a couple others that would worry me a little bit more, not because they don't have horrible records, because they're smooth talkers. And I think that when you look at what people are concerned about right now, when you look at that race, there's a lot of people that don't want to vote for Trump. There's also a lot of people that are Democrats that won't vote for Biden, but they'll stay home. If they could vote for a Gavin Newsom, they're not pissed at Biden for his policies. Remember, a lot of these Democrats, young voters, minorities, they vote for him because they think he's out of touch. He doesn't get this. So you substitute somebody else in there. That's where I get a little worried.
Yeah. Yeah. I
don't, just so people don't misinterpret what I'm saying. Can Trump still beat him? Absolutely. It goes back to the same principle that I'm talking about, the number of swing states. He's got a very robust organization. And the idea of switching horses at the convention, which is where it would have to be for the Dems, that would be the biggest problem right then. But does it worry me? Yes. And I think anybody who's not worried should have their head examined, because if you can get rid of Biden, it changes the dynamic significantly.
Yeah. Do you think, a lot of people are saying it's going to be Michelle Obama, but Michelle Obama has said, I'm shy. I don't have the drive. She didn't really love being first lady. She doesn't have a lot of political experience. She has a lot of supporting a politician, but not a lot of political experience. I don't know that leaders around the world would say, oh, wow, we're suddenly nervous about who's back in power in the United States. So I do think Gavin Newsom or somebody else is a bigger threat than Michelle Obama, but people like to throw out the name Obama. So maybe that's it.
So I will just tell your folks right now, Michelle Obama will not be the nominee ever, full stop. You made a very compelling case, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. She doesn't want to do this. She's never enjoyed it. I think, frankly, the Obamas collectively are living a great life right now, making a ton of money, giving one-off speeches and lucrative deals with Netflix. They have no desire to enter the world. I mean, they have a great life, and I don't think that there's any. Michelle Obama has no desire. That's number one. Number two, is the following. And this is kind of like the speaker's race. You know, when people are like, well, you don't have to be a member of the House to be speaker, and it's going to, maybe they start looking outside. True. But the people with power, the members of Congress, was never going to elect somebody who's not one of their own to lead them. It's just not going to happen, ever. Same thing with running for president. You've got Gavin Newsom, Kathy Hochul, Gretchen Whitmer, Pete Buttigieg. The list goes down on and on. And Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce from Rhode Island. These folks are not going to allow somebody who's not elected, not in the game, never been tested, never been on a ballot, to take what they think is rightfully theirs. They're not going to let it happen. And the thing is that I also think that the Biden team doesn't want the Obama team coming back. They were very protective of their guy. If he steps down, they're going to want to be the people that get to pick. They don't want the Obama team to come back in and take what they have sort of earned.
Yeah, I think the only one that really wants an Obama back would maybe be whatever's left of Citibank. They were basically his entire cabinet.
Well,
but
the other thing is, look, I do think there's a machine. I said before about the consultants, they all had this big 15-year reunion in Chicago last week. There is a, what's the right word? A cabal, an industry that gets tons of money off of this. And so I think that that's part of it, is that these guys will do very well.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, couple of personal questions. How hard was it to be the White House press secretary under Donald Trump? And what was like your biggest takeaway, your biggest lesson?
It was unbelievably challenging every day, which kind of gets back to the biggest takeaway, which is, so I've been doing this for a while. I mean, I've been somebody's spokesperson or running communications or putting communication strategies together for 2 decades. And there's sort of a protocol, if you will. You know, you see a problem or an event or an announcement and you put a plan together and you present it and get buy-in and execute. And that's how it's always been. The problem is Trump doesn't care. He has a wonderful mind for understanding the media landscape and public opinion. And so he knows what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And he doesn't really care about your plan. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't listen. Don't get me wrong on that, but he has a sixth sense about how things will work best, right? And what it took for me to realize was I kind of needed him to lead and me to amplify, as opposed to me to sort of go in, execute the plan, and then him be the principal and come out and do whatever, which is how it would normally work. And so it took a while to sort of recognize that the rules were going to be different.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, even like in New York, they're like, control your client. They're like,
Yeah,
oh,
I know.
yeah.
I get it, dude. Every time I hear the judge say
Yeah.
that, I'm like, dude, do you not realize, have you been living under a rock? Because that's not like, the lawyers aren't like, it's the same type of people that said to me, you know, did you ever tell the president not to tweet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Once.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he is he just does what he wants. They like, you just can't control him. You just got to get out of the way, right? So thank you for answering that. Do you think there's any way to bridge the division within our country, or are we just kind of two countries within one country trying to make, you know, our vision the vision of the future?
That is a really good question, because I would like to think that there is. So let me back this up for a second. See, I don't really care what your personal beliefs are if you don't infringe on mine. I really don't. And I've thought this for most of my career, right? I respect that there are different views than mine. If you want to believe something, if it doesn't harm me, I don't really care. If you want to go home and dress up like a furry, I don't really care. I really believe that you have the right to do things that, as long as they don't infringe on me. The problem, I think, is that the left doesn't share that view anymore. They want you to accept their beliefs, to say things, to act a certain way, to not act a certain way. And I think that's the problem or the concern I have with bridging the divide that people ask about, because I don't think it's on the right. We're not the intolerant ones. I don't really care about your pronouns, but you can't force me to use them. You can't tell me that I have to call somebody a cat if they're a person.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the left is at now, where they're saying, if you don't do what I believe you need to do, if you don't ascribe my values and adhere to my values, then I get to cancel you. I think that's the problem right now, is that we live in a country where the left wants everybody to agree to their set of principles. And as I said, the right doesn't, for the most part, care about that. It's live and let live and do what you want. So I don't, the nut of your second question is I just don't know how we get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, like RFK Jr. has said he wants to unite the country, but it's just so hard to do that when the media and politics is constantly trying to drive hate between us.
Right.
Again, I don't have an answer, and I didn't know if you would either, because it's such a complex thing. But I hate the idea that somebody wouldn't talk to me because I'm a libertarian, or that you're a Republican, or that someone's a Democrat. Like, I think we're entitled to our own beliefs. I agree with you. You don't make my life terrible. I won't make your life terrible. We move forward, but there's so much division. But I do hear what you're saying, where the left first demanded tolerance, and now they demand allegiance. And when you demand that somebody fall in line with your own level of thinking, and versus respecting that they're their own person, their own soul, their own mind, it's a terrible bridge to try to, or a terrible chasm to try to bridge that gap. And I don't know how we get there, but I thought I would at least throw it
But
out to someone smarter than me.
no, well, Stephen, I think a lot of this comes down to, it's almost like religion to me, which is somebody comes out, I'm a Catholic, somebody comes to me and says I'm Jewish. I'm like, great. Like, I'm not trying to convince you to be Catholic or Christian, or, if they were a Muslim or something like that. I respect their, or not. If they say I'm a non-believer, that's your right. But what we're entering is a phase where somebody comes up to you and says, I'm a Catholic, and if you don't believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, then I need to cancel you. I need to think you're bad. And we've entered a phase where, this is the equivalent of it as far as I'm concerned, that we've lost respect for, and I say we, it's the left who's lost respect for the fact that people don't agree with them. I watched somebody on Instagram the other day that I know. When Mike Johnson got sworn in as speaker, they pulled up an interview where he said something about, like, if you want to know what I believe, then look in the Bible, because that's where I base my beliefs. And this person posted and said that it's such an outdated value system, or something to the extent of that. And I was like, so this person is guided by the Bible, which, by the way, tell me what's wrong in there, treating your neighbor a certain way, loving your wife and your family, not stealing, not murdering. I'm not entirely sure what's wrong there. But the idea that they attacked him for believing that was how his life was based on. And I was like, see, this is the problem. You can't even respect the fact that, like I said, if someone's a non-believer, they have a right to do that. I don't share that view, but I'm not going to attack them for it.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Since being the White House press secretary, you've also danced with the stars and been on Newsmax, and now you have the Sean Spicer Show. How can people follow you and get access to your podcast?
Well, thank you. The easiest way, you can subscribe either on Apple Podcasts, you go there, Sean Spicer Show. 5-star reviews are always appreciated. YouTube and Rumble, if you just go to the Sean Spicer Show, and subscribe, hit the notification button, that's greatly appreciated. And then I've got a VIP community, SeanSpicerShow.com/VIP, where we do weekly talks and chats with people. And as I mentioned, I know if people are watching this now, tomorrow morning, we do have that last thing. It's called Debate Prep. It just streams live on my YouTube channel that you can jump on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for having me, Stephen.